In the far reaches of space, on a distant planet, humanity had settled among a myriad of alien species. Among them was a race that ran an intergalactic zoo, creatures from across the galaxy, contained and cared for under their cold, watchful eyes. The zoo was vast, unlike anything Earth had ever seen, and for many, it was a wonder. For a boy named Ethan, however, it was his refuge. Ethan, just 10 years old, had grown up on this alien world. His parents were busy with colony duties, leaving him to explore the zoo for hours on end. He wasn't alone, though. By his side always was his pet. Not just any pet, a small, rare alien creature with shimmering scales that changed color depending on its mood. They'd been inseparable since his arrival. The creature had become his only friend, his lifeline in a strange, distant world. The creature was special. It wasn't like the animals he'd known back on Earth. It seemed to understand him in ways that were impossible for mere animals. It would nuzzle him when he was sad, dance playfully when he was happy, and sleep curled by his side every night. It wasn't just a pet, it was his closest companion, the only being that made this alien planet feel a little bit like home. While the other children at the colony school looked at him as an outsider, the creature never did. It was more than a friend, it was his anchor. Days in the zoo were often spent wandering between the cages and exhibits, but Ethan never strayed far from his creature's enclosure. He watched the alien zookeeper move between the cages, his cold, segmented eyes scanning the animals with an efficiency that Ethan found unsettling. The zookeeper's race, tall, with a chitinous exoskeleton, had no warmth in them, at least not by human standards. To the zookeeper, animals were assets to be catalogued and cared for with precision, but nothing more. There was no affection in his touch, no concern in his gaze. To the zookeeper, Ethan's pet was just another creature, one among thousands. Ethan had tried to talk to him once, asking questions about how the zoo was run, but the zookeeper barely glanced at him, uninterested in human emotions or concerns. His answers were clipped, scientific. The zookeeper was a caretaker, yes, but his care extended only to keeping the creatures alive and ensuring they didn't escape. Anything beyond that, empathy, understanding, was foreign to him. It was on one such day, while Ethan sat by his pet's enclosure, that tragedy struck. The zookeeper was performing his routine checks, moving from cage to cage, his long limbs darting out to prod and adjust as needed. Ethan's pet had been feeling unwell for a few days. Ethan could tell, even if the zookeeper couldn't. The creature wasn't eating as it usually did, and its scales had lost some of their luster. Ethan had tried to get the zookeeper's attention, but the alien dismissed it, saying it was normal for the creature's species to have fluctuations in behavior. But something was wrong. Ethan knew it. The zookeeper entered the enclosure to check on the pet. His movements were quick, mechanical, as he handled the creature. Ethan watched, concern gnawing at him. The creature flinched under the zookeeper's touch, its scales flashing red, fear. Ethan's heart pounded. He called out, telling the zookeeper to be careful, to let him hold the creature instead, but the zookeeper ignored him. With a sudden, sharp movement, the alien lifted the pet, trying to force it into a containment unit for examination. It happened so fast. A sharp, pained sound escaped the creature. Its small body stiffened, and then, nothing. It went limp in the zookeeper's grasp. Ethan froze, his mind unable to process what had just happened. He rushed forward, his voice shaking, yelling at the zookeeper to stop. But it was too late. The creature, his friend, was gone. The zookeeper glanced at Ethan, his face impassive. "An unfortunate accident," he said, as though he had simply spilled water, not ended a life. "The creature was weak. It happens." Weak. Ethan's world spun. His companion, the only thing that had made this place bearable, was gone, reduced to a lifeless form in the cold hands of someone who didn't care. The zookeeper didn't even look remorseful. He just placed the creature down, as though it was an object, not a living, breathing being that had mattered. Ethan felt a hollowness inside him, followed quickly by a surge of fury. How could the zookeeper be so indifferent? How could he just dismiss the life of something so precious? He screamed at the alien, demanding answers, demanding that he care, but the zookeeper simply walked away, his duty done. No apology, no emotion. It wasn't important to him. That was when it hit Ethan. To the zookeeper, none of this was personal. None of these creatures were more than specimens in cages. His pet had been just another animal to be examined and discarded when it became inconvenient. The crushing weight of loss settled over him. He collapsed beside his pet's still form, tears streaming down his face. He'd never felt so alone, so utterly abandoned. His parents wouldn't understand, and the adults around him would likely tell him it was just a pet, just an animal. But to Ethan, it had been everything. As the grief consumed him, a new feeling started to bubble beneath the surface. Rage. A rage so deep, so powerful, it threatened to overwhelm him. This wasn't just about the zookeeper killing his pet. It was about the casual disregard for life, for something that had meant the world to him. He clenched his fists, trembling with anger. No one had listened to him. No one had cared. The alien zookeeper, with his cold detachment, had taken something precious from him, and now all Ethan could feel was the burning need to make things right, to make the zookeeper understand what he had done. The seed had been planted. Ethan's world had shattered, and all that remained was the hollow echo of loss. The grief twisted inside him, curling into something darker, something angrier. Everyone around him seemed to move on as if nothing had changed, as if his pet hadn't been more than a fleeting part of their day. But for Ethan, it was everything. He withdrew, retreating into the quiet spaces of his mind, barely speaking to anyone. The sorrow was too much, but so was the rage. It burned in him like a fire, hot and unrelenting. He couldn't just let it go. The zookeeper's indifference gnawed at him, the way he just discarded the life of something so precious, brushing it off like it didn't matter. Ethan couldn't stand it. He needed to do something, anything, to make the zookeeper understand the pain he'd caused. He needed justice. Or maybe, deep down, he wanted revenge. One night, when the colony was quiet, Ethan slipped out of his quarters. He'd made up his mind. If no one else cared, he would make them care. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he knew where to start: the zoo. The alien keeper would be there, or at least something he could damage, something he could break that would hurt him back. He moved quickly, his heart pounding in his chest, every step fueled by his anger. Once inside, the zoo felt different. It wasn't the place of wonder and companionship he had known. Now it was eerie. The lights were dim, the animal noises faint echoes in the distance. The usual paths, the familiar exhibits, none of it interested him. He wanted to go further, deeper. Past the public areas, past where visitors were allowed to go. Somewhere beyond the signs, beyond the gates, into the parts of the zoo no one ever saw. That's where he would find something, anything, to bring down the zookeeper. He wandered through the maze of corridors, driven by the heat of his fury. The zoo became stranger the further he went. The air felt heavier, the silence oppressive. No more playful animals or cheerful displays, only darkened halls and locked doors. It was as if the zoo was hiding something, keeping secrets just beyond reach. After what felt like hours, he came across a door he had never seen before. It was different from the others, larger, older. The material was rough, worn, and strange symbols were etched across its surface, glowing faintly in the dark. They weren't like the language of the zookeepers or any writing Ethan had seen before. This door wasn't just locked, it was sealed, like something important lay behind it. Something dangerous. He hesitated for a moment, but only a moment. This was it. Whatever the zookeeper didn't want anyone to find, it was here. His curiosity, mingled with his thirst for revenge, pushed him forward. The door felt cold under his hand, and as he pressed against it, it slid open with a low, rumbling sound. Inside, the chamber was massive, the air thick with age and mystery. The walls were lined with strange artifacts, ancient relics, alien technology. Everything was bathed in a soft, eerie glow. But what caught Ethan's eye was the centerpiece of the room, a massive stone altar, and behind it, more of those glowing symbols, circling what appeared to be an enormous cage. It wasn't just any cage, it looked like it had been built to hold something powerful, something beyond what any ordinary creature could ever be. Ethan stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. The air around the cage felt wrong, like it pulsed with a strange energy. He could barely make out the faint, intricate carvings along the walls, depicting scenes of chaos and destruction. And there, etched in the stone, was the creature, massive, terrifying. He didn't need to understand the language to know what it was. This was a monster, a creature of unspeakable power. A being so dangerous that it had been sealed away, left forgotten, locked up where no one could ever release it. As he examined the hieroglyphics, the story unfolded. The zookeeper's race had imprisoned this beast long ago after it had wreaked havoc across planets. It had taken countless lives, destroyed entire civilizations. But somehow, they had captured it, using some form of ancient alien technology that Ethan couldn't comprehend. And now, here it was, sleeping beneath the zoo, its power contained, until now. Ethan's mind raced. Could this be the key? Could this be what would finally make the zookeeper understand the pain he had caused? The idea was reckless, dangerous. But he didn't care. The zookeeper had destroyed something precious to him, and now Ethan had a way to strike back. To make him feel what Ethan felt. He stood in front of the massive cage, anger thrumming through him. His hand moved to a nearby console, his fingers brushing over controls he barely understood. He hesitated, just for a second, as the weight of his decision pressed on him. But the anger, the grief, it was too much. He needed to act. He needed to punish the zookeeper for what he had done. His pet was gone, and no one cared. But this would make them care. Ignoring the warnings flashing on the screen, Ethan pressed the final sequence. The room trembled, the ground vibrating under his feet as the ancient machinery roared to life. The seals on the cage began to glow brighter, pulsing with energy as ancient mechanisms, long dormant, began to unlock. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as the air shifted. Something was waking up. Something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The air cracked with a deafening roar as the ancient creature awoke, its sheer size and power dwarfing anything Ethan had ever imagined. The monster was grotesque, its body a twisted mass of muscle and scales, with jagged spikes protruding from its back. Its eyes, so many of them, glowed with a burning intensity, each one seeming to reflect a different shade of chaos. Massive claws, sharp enough to rend metal, scraped the ground as it stirred, shaking off centuries of confinement. Ethan, standing frozen before the beast, felt a rush of something he hadn't expected, triumph. For a fleeting moment, he believed he had succeeded. The monster, a weapon of unimaginable force, would punish the zookeeper and everyone who had ignored his pain. They would finally know what it felt like to lose something irreplaceable. His heart pounded, exhilarated by the thought of retribution. But as the creature fully rose from its slumber, the ground trembled, and the air grew thick with a primal, terrifying energy. The monster's first act was a swing of its colossal arm, smashing through the stone walls of its chamber, as though they were paper. Debris flew, and the entire zoo shook. Ethan's brief moment of satisfaction was cut short as reality crashed in. This wasn't just a creature that would punish the zookeeper. This was something far more dangerous, something uncontrollable. The monster roared again, louder this time, and began tearing through the zoo. It moved with terrifying speed for something so large, its massive claws ripping through enclosures and cages as if they were nothing. The animals within, frightened and confused, bolted in all directions. Dangerous creatures, once contained behind reinforced barriers, were suddenly free. Panic swept through the zoo as alarms blared and zoo staff scrambled to get control of the situation. The alien zookeeper, emotionless as ever, rushed into action, directing his staff and attempting to coordinate a response. But this was far beyond anything the zoo had prepared for. The monster was no ordinary beast, it was a force of pure destruction, and nothing they did seemed to slow it down. It crashed through barriers, sending animals fleeing in terror. the once orderly zoo descended into complete chaos, with deadly creatures running amok and the staff struggling to maintain any semblance of control. Ethan stood frozen in horror as he watched the scene unfold. What had he done? The triumph he had felt just moments ago dissolved into cold, creeping guilt. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. The monster didn't care about his pain, about his need for justice. It cared only for its own rage. It wasn't punishing the zookeeper, it was punishing everyone. The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. This was his fault. All of this chaos, this destruction, was because of him. He watched as the monster continued its rampage, indifferent to what or who stood in its way. Buildings crumbled under its might, animals scattered in every direction, and people, human and alien alike, ran in terror. The zoo was being torn apart, and Ethan could do nothing but stand there, paralyzed by the weight of his actions. This wasn't what he wanted. He hadn't meant for things to go this far. But now, the destruction was unstoppable, and it was too late to take it back. As the chaos unfolded around him, Ethan's mind raced. The creature wasn't just wrecking the zoo, it was moving with purpose, its eyes scanning the horizon as if seeking something more. And then Ethan saw it. The creature's gaze shifted beyond the zoo, toward the distant outlines of the human colony. His heart sank. The monster wasn't finished here. It was going to keep going. In a matter of minutes, the creature had reduced most of the zoo to rubble, and now it turned its attention toward the colony, its massive frame lumbering forward with terrifying determination. The defenses of the zoo had been useless against it, and Ethan could see the colony's defenses would fare no better. Alien technology, security barriers, nothing could stop a force like this. As the monster moved closer, Ethan's chest tightened with fear. The colony was home to his parents, to the few people he had left. All his anger, all his desire for revenge, was now replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. This wasn't just about him anymore. If the monster reached the colony, it would destroy everything, and everyone, he cared about. He had wanted to make the zookeeper suffer, to make him feel the loss and pain he had endured. But now, the consequences were far greater than he had ever imagined. Ethan was left standing on the edge of the chaos, consumed by guilt, torn between the devastation he had caused and the desperate need to stop it before it wiped out everything he loved. Ethan stood there, watching the monster draw closer to the colony, his heart pounding in his chest. The destruction he had unleashed was unimaginable, and the weight of it pressed down on him like a physical force. This was his doing. No one else could stop it, and no one else should have to. He alone had released the creature, and now it was his responsibility to make things right. He had no time to dwell on his fear or his regret. If he didn't act now, everything and everyone he cared about would be lost. Flashes of the chamber came back to him, the symbols, the carvings, the artifacts. Somewhere in that chaos, buried beneath his rage, he had seen something. Clues about how the creature had been subdued in the first place. The monster hadn't been killed before, it had been contained. That meant there was a way to stop it, a way to imprison it again. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together fragments of the ancient text he had glimpsed. The answer had to be in those symbols, those devices that lined the walls of the chamber. He knew he didn't have much time, but if he could find something to replicate what had been done before, he might just have a chance. Determined, Ethan ran back through the ruined zoo, searching for anything that might help. The zoo had artifacts and weapons from across the galaxy, many of them off-limits to visitors, but now those restrictions didn't matter. Among the wreckage, he found what he was looking for, an ancient alien device, forgotten in the chaos. He had no idea how it worked, but it pulsed with the same strange energy he had felt in the chamber. This had to be part of the answer. With the device in hand, Ethan made his way toward the monster, now looming at the edge of the colony. The ground trembled beneath him with each step the beast took, and the air seemed to crackle with the sheer power of its presence. It was massive, terrifying, and unstoppable. But Ethan wasn't thinking about fear anymore. His mind was focused sharp. He had to stop it. He had to. He reached the outskirts of the zoo and saw the creature up close, its grotesque form, all claws and eyes, its skin shimmering with an unnatural glow. But Ethan had an advantage. He knew the zoo, its layout, its hidden spaces. He could use that knowledge to lead the creature into a trap, to lure it into the place where he had first released it. That chamber, with its ancient mechanisms, was his best shot at containing it once more. Moving quickly, Ethan made enough noise to draw the creature's attention, then darted through the broken zoo, leading the monster into a narrow, enclosed space. It followed, its massive bulk smashing through what little remained standing. The ground shook with every step, but Ethan kept going, his heart racing. He knew he only had one shot at this. Finally, they reached the chamber. Ethan, now armed with the alien device, stood his ground as the monster loomed above him, its many eyes glaring down. This was it, the moment everything had been leading to. He had no way of knowing if the device would work, but he had to try. The battle that followed was brutal. The creature, sensing the trap, lashed out with terrifying speed, its claws swiping at Ethan. But Ethan was quick, his mind sharp with the clarity of desperation. He dodged, using the chamber's narrow confines to limit the creature's movement. Each time it struck, Ethan evaded, barely escaping its deadly blows. But he couldn't keep this up forever. He needed to end it, and fast. With a surge of determination, Ethan activated the device. A low hum filled the air, and the ancient symbols on the walls began to glow. The creature, sensing the shift in energy, roared in fury and lunged at Ethan. But it was too late. The device pulsed, and the containment mechanism, the same one that had held the creature for centuries, began to activate. A blinding light filled the chamber, as the alien technology sprang to life. The monster screamed, its body twisting and thrashing as the containment field started to pull it back toward its prison. It fought with all its might, but the force was too strong. Slowly it was dragged back, its enormous form shrinking as the light engulfed it. With one final, earth-shaking roar, the monster disappeared, sealed away once again. Ethan collapsed to the ground, exhausted but alive. He had done it. He had stopped the creature, but the cost had been immense. The zoo lay in ruins, and the colony had barely survived. As he caught his breath, the alien zookeeper appeared, his usual stoic expression softened by what Ethan could only interpret as respect. Despite everything, the zookeeper had seen what Ethan had done, his bravery, his willingness to fix his mistake. Together, they worked to seal the chamber, ensuring the monster would remain trapped for good this time. The threat was gone, but the destruction it had caused was still fresh. The zoo would take years to rebuild, and the scars of this event would remain with Ethan for a long time. But something had changed. He wasn't the same boy who had unleashed the monster in a moment of anger and grief. He had faced his darkest impulses and had come out the other side with a deeper understanding of the weight of his actions. In the aftermath, the colony began to recover. Ethan's relationship with the zookeeper shifted. There was no longer animosity between them, but rather a quiet understanding. The zoo, though damaged, would heal. And so would Ethan. He had learned that even in the face of unimaginable loss and anger, he had the strength to make things right. And that, more than anything, was what it meant to be human.